Planet America's fake news.
What the hell is going on here?
Hello, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Shazza Chidello.
What a week. The third Democratic debate. The National Security Advisor was sacked. The Afghan peace talks collapsed.
Another primary challenger to Trump, a special election, the Supreme Court weighs in on immigration.
And don't forget Sharpie-gate.
No, not Sharpie-gate! So is that why I've got this?
Exactly.
Oh, God, why don't you ever dress yourself up, John?
Because I'm not stupid. Before we boot scoot our way down to Texas, let's see where the candidates for the Democratic presidential nomination stood heading into today's third round debate. Biden's lead remains steady at around 12 percentage points. Warren and Sanders still effectively tied for second, in a gap of more than 10 points to Kamala Harris. Next is Buttigieg, then Yang, moving to the top of the bottom tier, or the bottom of the top tier. He's in sixth place. That's bad news for the rest, including Booker, O'Rourke, Gabbard and Klobuchar, with the remainder, all 10 of them, on under 1%. And then, of course, finally Bullock, Messam and Sestak with an average of exactly 0 support.
Oh, so Bullock's gaining support there.
Statistically, I'm not sure. To qualify for this debate, candidates needed to reach 2% in 4 approved national or early state polls, as well as having a minimum 130,000 individual donors. Just 10 managed to do that, and here they are, left to right across the stage. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar.
New Jersey Senator Cory Booker.
The Mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
Former Vice President Joe Biden.
For the first time on the same debate stage as Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Next to her, California Senator Kamala Harris.
Businessman Andrew Yang.
Former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke.
And former Housing Secretary Julian Castro.
So, Joe Biden went into this debate as the front runner yet again, Chaz, and the big question was, with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders by his side, was he going to have a big target on his back? And if so, who was going to go after him? How do you think Biden did?
My takeaway from Biden was he just seemed very confused. He confused billions and trillions for a start. He went down the wrong camera when he delivered his killer line about, "I know about cancer." He's very vague at times and very confusing. He had his big moment. It was his planned big moment when he admitted an error on Iraq, the vote in Iraq. That's the first time he said, "I made a mistake." He took responsibility for it. But then he was vague and confused about that as well.
Well, given that Joe Biden's big selling point, not just as vice president, but also for 3.5 decades in the Senate, including his time as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, was all about he knows the world better than anyone. He's the one who can take over from Trump on day one and restore America's place in the world. And you're absolutely right. When he started talking about his role in drawing down American forces from Iraq, which Obama basically asked Biden to oversee that as a special project. And then when Biden started talking about why Afghanistan is kind of irreconcilable and why Islamic State went into Iraq, it became an absolute word salad. And this is meant to be his absolute strong suit. But we did see, as we have seen in the earlier debates, yet again, Joe Biden really wrapping himself around Barack Obama and saying that is the Obama-Biden legacy. Here's an example.
She's for Bernie. Well, I'm for Barack. So I'm proud to have served with him. I stand with Barack Obama all 8 years, good, bad, and indifferent.
So that's what Biden does. But what was interesting is that was also in this debate what Castro did.
Julian Castro, who himself, as a former mayor of San Antonio, Texas, went on to become the Secretary for Housing and Urban Development in the Obama administration. So Biden and Castro spent a number of years around the cabinet table in the Obama years. I get the impression they don't like each other. At least Castro doesn't like Joe, mate.
Yeah, Castro certainly gave that impression. And it's interesting because we've said that people would have to do some desperate things like Castro.
Yep.
Someone would have to go after Biden. And Castro decided to go after Biden on Biden's strength, being Mr. Obama, and saying, "No, you're not Mr. Obama, I'm Mr. Obama." And he pretty much took him out.
Every time something good about Barack Obama comes up, he says, "Oh, I was there. That's me too." And then every time somebody questions part of the administration that we were both part of, he says, "Well, that was the president. I'm fulfilling the legacy of Barack Obama, and you're not."
That'll be a surprise to him.
Are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago?
Being for it.
Are you forgetting already what you said just 2 minutes ago?
So Castro, very, very aggressive and kind of, without saying it, basically said, Joe Biden, you're losing your marbles, you're a demented old fool. Yeah. Except partly perhaps because Biden was sort of all over the shop with his word salady response earlier about Medicare. But Biden actually said that you would, like in that case that Castro was talking about, his grandmother would have automatically gone on to Medicare. So Castro's big attack, I can't believe you're forgetting, Castro was wrong. And there's nothing worse than when you go for the killer blow and you miss or you get it wrong in that way. You look bad.
But good luck working it out with all the garbage Biden was espousing.
Right, exactly.
I should say, what I found interesting about Castro as well is back in debate 1, he was being the lefty. He was embracing wokeness and transgender
Progressive
issues.
on immigration.
Yeah, and immigration. And this time he was pushing himself as the moderate. He's trying to take Biden votes away, which I found really interesting.
And that
trying to reinvent himself.
And that's kind of a dynamic throughout the whole debate. I thought, it looks so good on you. What are you doing? So there was a lot going on in the debate where it was the moderates. We're kind of wondering, was Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders going to be attacking Biden? But it was the moderates. It was Castro. We've seen in the past Booker playing that role, but this time it was Castro, and to an extent Amy Klobuchar as well. So it's the centrists saying, hey, if I'm getting anywhere, there's big fat Joe Biden in front of me. But healthcare, of course, is the issue where there are genuine policy differences between Democrats.
Huge differences. We saw the full span. First of all, we saw a bizarre quote from Joe Biden when Bernie Sanders was saying Americans pay twice as much. Joe Biden said, "This is America." What?
Yeah.
You're embracing that as a patriot?
I think he's kind of saying we're not Venezuela. He was almost trying a Republican rebuttal to we're not socialists.
It's very strange. But anyway, Sanders has always hit the stats hard when it comes to healthcare. Elizabeth Warren, interestingly, she always does this. While Sanders talks about stats, Warren makes it about the people. Yeah. Sanders is talking about the bankruptcies. Warren says for every single dollar of profit that the health insurance companies make, that's someone they said no to.
Yeah.
And she makes that appeal, which I think is very effective myself.
Yeah, but she is still very much in this camp of saying we're going to get rid of private insurance, and clearly Biden has calculated this is going to scare, he talks about 130 million Americans who like their insurance policy, and he came up with a line which may come back to haunt him because it sounds an awful lot like when Obama said, if you like your doctor, you can keep them.
Yes,
He's
Biden,
saying, if you like your healthcare policy, you can keep your healthcare policy.
Don't do that, Biden.
No,
don't do that.
That didn't work for Barack.
Buttigieg tried a new line about saying how he trusts the American people to make their own choice. Why doesn't Bernie Sanders trust the American people? Which I found interesting.
Yeah, and there was another interesting attack on Bernie's healthcare as well, because everyone who's in favour of Medicare for all, or even those that are going for the middle ground of you can buy into Medicare, there can be a government, non-profit, single-payer option, they're all giving Bernie a lot of credit for his being kind of the father of Medicare for all in the modern era. But he got a few dings as well.
He did. He certainly did. But the biggest one actually came from Amy Klobuchar.
A moderate.
Yeah, who was trying lines all night. And this one really landed with her going hard on Medicare for all.
And while Bernie wrote the bill, I read the bill. And on page 8 of the bill, it says that we will no longer have private insurance as we know it. And that means that 149 million Americans will no longer be able to have their current insurance. I don't think that's a bold idea. I think it's a bad idea.
Now, that line worked for Amy Klobuchar.
Yeah.
They didn't all work. She was trying so many canned lines. Like there's one I wrote down, Trump treats farmers like the poker chips in one of his bankrupt casinos.
Yeah, although I must say, Amy Klobuchar, who often comes across as a little nervy or irritated in her kind of extemporaneous comments, she delivers a canned line rather better than some others. Kamala Harris, for instance, is somebody who I'll talk about her in a moment. Yeah. She kind of sounds a little bit scripted and rehearsed.
And I did like that Amy Klobuchar made my point about high-capacity magazines and mass shootings.
Yeah,
yes,
right. Now,
thank you.
let's talk about assault weapons, because this is again an area where Democrats, they broadly agree on the need for an assault weapons ban, such as there was in the 1990s and early 2000s, universal background checks, but there's also this sense of, but how realistic is it going to be? So even if we agree, we disagree on whether Congress will ever do anything about it. How much are you allowed to do on executive action? Kamala Harris says, I will do as president, I will sign executive orders, I will ban all these things. And Joe Biden's going, read the Constitution, lady, you're not allowed to do that. No president can do that. If you could do it, then, Donald Trump could do all sorts of other things. But interestingly, this has become an issue that Beto O'Rourke, because he is a former congressman from El Paso, Texas, the scene last month of that another terrible mass shooting, that's really become a kind of defining issue for his campaign. And he's taken a certain amount of moral leadership. And he got away one of the best lines, probably the most memorable line of the entire debate, when talking about his plan to ban assault weapons and to take them back, or essentially a gun buyback like we saw in Australia in the 90s. Take a look.
And in Odessa, I met the mother of a 15-year-old girl who was shot by an AR-15, and that mother watched her bleed to death over the course of an hour because so many other people were shot by that AR-15 in Odessa and Midland. There weren't enough ambulances to get to them in time. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
I want to commend Beto for how well he has spoken.
The way he handled what happened in his hometown is meaningful.
And I'm happy that people like Beto O'Rourke are showing such courage now.
And Beto, God love you.
So really interesting to see the other candidates heaping praise on Beto, which I can only assume means they think he has no chance of becoming the nominee. It's like praising Jay Inslee for the environment. It's just like he's gone, he's going nowhere.
Interestingly, I think he's become the opposite of Castro. He started off as a moderate,
Yeah.
and now he's gone all radical. He's talking at one point in time about Trump being a mortal threat to all black people.
Yeah.
That's a bit extreme.
It certainly is. Now, Kamala Harris, though, kind of interesting because in a way, she wasn't debating Joe Biden this time, as she famously did in the first debate, and she wasn't really debating other Democrats. She was debating Donald Trump.
Yeah, every time she was confused about something or didn't know where she was going, just attack Trump.
Not once have we talked about Donald Trump. He conducts trade policy by tweet, frankly born out of his fragile ego. You know, he reminds me of that guy in The Wizard of Oz. You know, when you pull back the curtain, it's a really small dude.
Kamala Harris doesn't like Trump very much.
No.
She also had, I thought, the biggest stretch of the debate, taking credit for LA's blue skies. I don't think that's Kamala Harris is doing. Anyway, Elizabeth Warren, I thought she continued her role as the explainer of the race. She did quite well. Talking about shootings, she said it's not about mass shootings, it's about gun violence, it's about suicides, it's about domestic violence, which I thought was very clever.
She has a different way of looking at a lot of issues, which gets around some of the sort of little quibbles over particular policies, which is clearly a strength with her. Although, in a debate sense, she didn't really engage with other candidates. It was interesting to see. At no point did she decide, you know, she's going to take on Joe Biden. And you feel as though, well, she's not prepared to take on Bernie Sanders because she likes him and agrees with him. She showed herself unwilling today, at least, to take on Biden. And that does leave the question of, okay, if nobody's actually going to lay a glove on Joe Biden, he's leading this race by 12 points. Is he just going to sail to the nomination?
It's interesting. I mean, she actually went out of the way to co-opt Bernie's message of corruption.
Yeah.
Like that was what Bernie was saying way back when about
She's been about being rigged as well.
I know, but everything came back to corruption for her. She kept on coming back to this message of it's about corruption over and over again, which I found interesting. She's still struggling on the middle class tax hikes though. She keeps on saying it's not about tax hikes, it's about total cost.
She won't say the word tax increases.
They will never let that go.
No.
That's going to follow her the whole primary.
Okay,
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders, to me, I think he kind of paled a little bit compared to Biden and Warren. It really felt to me as though Biden and Warren were commanding that stage. They were the focus of attention, not just because they were centre stage, whereas Harris was, as we discussed, kind of engaging Trump off to the side. Bernie was saying the same things that Bernie has been saying a long, long time. He looked older, he sounded a bit sick, his voice was even more strained than usual. It wasn't a great performance from Bernie.
I felt like he came off a little bit like an elder statesman. He was a bit calmer, less yelly and aggressive.
Yeah.
Like with the exception of blaming Joe Biden for the 500,000 medical bankruptcies, I thought it was a bit harsh. He was generally, I thought, quite restrained and even showed some humour at times, laughing at his own guess what line.
Yeah.
So I thought he came off.
Just before we run out of time, I mean, there wasn't a lot coming from either Pete Buttigieg, Andrew Yang. We've heard it all before. Now he's got a couple of key ideas.
He dropped the UBI thing. He didn't talk about that much.
No.
He's talking about democracy dollars instead.
Yeah, $100 in everyone's hands to go and spend on an election as a way of cleaning them up. Okay.
He seems reasonable, more like an opinion analyst, I think, than a candidate. But
all
anyway.
right. Well, the good thing is, of course, when we have the next round of debates in a month from now, we'll be back to at least 2 debates, not one, because there are going to be 11 candidates. Tom Steyer has qualified. Gabbard may qualify. Yes. We may see 1 or 2 others in there as well. So we're going to see them separated out to 2 smaller debates.
Twice.
6 or 7
Twice
candidates.
the pontification.
Yeah, exactly. And there are a few other bits of election-related news to mention this week. A close call for Republicans in a special election in North Carolina's 9th Congressional District.
Election results are in. Republican Dan Bishop got the win over Democrat Dan McCready in the District 9 special election.
It was tight. Dan Bishop beating Democrat Dan McCready by just 2 points in a seat Republicans have held since the 1960s. This was the do-over after last November's even tighter win by Republican Mark Harris. That was overturned in the favour trace of an absentee ballot fraud scandal. This race had the second highest amount of outside spending ever in a House election, almost $11 million, and that favoured Bishop 2-1 over McCready.
Yeah, although when you add up the total spending, it was $8 million each. The Democrats have been doing little laps of honour about this race because they did 11 points better than you'd expect them to, according to 538, who says the district is 14 points redder than the nation as a whole. In 2016, for instance, Trump won the district by 12. But this time, the Dems only lost by 2. I just wanted to point something out though. The Democrat McCready actually improved on his 2018 vote in the suburbs. He won there by 13 points rather than by 10 points. However, he did worse than in 2018 in every other county. And so therefore he lost by 3,000 more votes than he lost by in 2018. In other words, this trend where Democrats are gaining suburban votes at the expense of rural votes might not necessarily end in glorious victory. If I was the Democrats, I'd take that as a warning.
Well, meanwhile, President Trump officially has another primary challenger. Former South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford joins Joe Walsh and Bill Weld competing with Trump for the Republican presidential nomination. Sanford is best known for going missing for almost a week in 2009.
The Republican governor in that state has disappeared, sort of. He simply took off last Thursday and hasn't been seen since.
Famously, at the time, Governor Sanford's staff said that he was hiking on the Appalachian Trail. That soon became a euphemism. It was very weird because he was leaving his family on the Father's Day weekend. He finally admitted the truth.
I've been unfaithful to my wife. I developed a relationship with which started as a dear, dear friend from Argentina.
So now he wants to take on Trump, focusing on the issue of debt, but that old scandal won't go away.
It is something of great regret. It's something I've apologized extensively for. And in contrast to the president, where he says there's not a single thing that he sort of regrets or apologizes for, I profoundly apologize for that.
And Mark Sanford has his work cut out for him, John, because Republicans have cancelled the presidential primary in South Carolina, his home state, as well as the primaries in Nevada and Kansas. And the Arizona primary has since been cancelled as well. Now, not everyone is thrilled with these cancellations. Republican candidate Joe Walsh tweeted, "To protect the king, the Republican Party is actually going to eliminate elections." And yeah, it doesn't look great, but this is far from unprecedented. The Arizona Democrats cancelled Obama's 2012 primary and Clinton's 1996 primary. The Republicans cancelled about 10 primaries for George W. Bush in 2004. Dodgiest of all, the Republicans cancelled George H.W. Bush's caucus in Iowa in 1992, saying no straw poll would be necessary because no significant opposition is expected. This was the year that Pat Buchanan ended up getting 23% of the primary vote. So cancelling primaries is pretty standard stuff. Nevertheless, people have connected this to Trump currently polling at 38 or 39% in a number of polls to create a narrative of election vulnerability. And it's true that 538's polling averages show Trump's job approval on the slide for the last 6 weeks or so, down to 41.3%. But leaving aside Trump's honeymoon period, that's still a lot closer to his high point than his low point. And besides, what do you think his competitors' favourability ratings are like? Don't get too hung up on the precise numbers here because these can vary a bit. But if we look at the most recent YouGov poll, Trump has a favourability rating of 43%. Okay, not great. But Joe Biden has a favourability of 40%. And Bernie Sanders has a favourability of 41%. And Elizabeth Warren has a favourability of 39%. This is across all American adults, of course, not just Democrats. But don't get too excited, Trump supporters. Because if you look at their unfavourability ratings, everyone's made up their mind about Trump. He's stuck there. But all the Democrats have 5 to 10% lower unfavourables. So their favourability ratings have more room to grow. And that's what the next 12 months is going to be about. Trump trying to make that final 10% of people grow to hate his opponent. By the way, John, the worst news of the week for Trump has been largely ignored.
Really?
Yeah. Former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz announced to his imaginary friends that he will not be running for president as an independent. If he'd run, many people believed that it could have siphoned off potential Democratic votes and handed re-election to Trump. So it seems that Trump's going to have to do this one on his own.
In the back back of every presidential candidate's mind is the possibility that in a debate or on the campaign trail, they're never more than one slip of the tongue from a gaffe that causes major damage to their hopes of winning the White House. Despite hours of practice debates, memorising key points and attack lines on their rivals, in the heat of the moment, they can say something or forget to say something and...
oops.
This is the story of Rick Perry, 2012. In the summer of 2011, President Barack Obama's poll bounce from the killing of Osama bin Laden had faded, and Gallup found an unnamed Republican Party candidate beating Obama by 8 points. Gallup noted Obama's re-election prospects did not look very favourable, but there was a problem for Republicans. Americans did not generally hold a very positive view of their presumptive frontrunner, Mitt Romney. Conservatives were concerned about the former Massachusetts governor's moderate record, particularly on health care.
He has not backed away from it and hopes ultimately that as the Republican nominee, having had some experience passing health care reform, it might help him. But with conservatives, it has caused some problems, and there's a lot of criticism and a lot of suspicion.
Maybe this guy was the answer.
Republican Texas Governor Rick Perry may now be considering a presidential run.
Rick Perry stayed on the sidelines as the Republican field took shape in June and July of 2011, but he certainly seemed to be positioning himself as a powerful challenger to Obama.
That mix of arrogance and audacity that guides the Obama administration is an affront to every freedom-loving American.
And over on Fox News, they were wondering,
is Perry the candidate the Republican Party has been waiting for, and can he beat President Obama?
In August 2011, Rick Perry made it official.
I declare to you today as a candidate for President of the United States.
On paper, he was almost too good to be true, the longest-serving governor in the history of Texas with a lifetime A+ rating from the National Rifle Association.
I'm an incredibly proud American.
His campaign took off. Within days, Rick Perry was the new frontrunner, leading Romney by 6 points. Taking to the debate stage, Perry typically started strongly.
And they're coming into this country because the federal government has failed to secure that border. But they're coming here because there is a magnet, and the magnet is called jobs.
But something weird was happening. As the debates entered their second hour, Perry's concentration seemed to fade. Scripted attacks started to come out in a bit of a jumble, like this in Perry's third debate in Orlando in late September.
He was before these social programs from the standpoint of he was for standing up for Roe versus Wade before he was against Roe versus Wade.
Perry had a point. Romney was a bit of a flip-flopper.
Oh, you flip on everything.
A moderate in Massachusetts, Romney was now running to Perry's right on issues like illegal immigration. The Texan was asked to justify his own policy of allowing children of illegal immigrants to receive state-subsidised education.
But if you say that we should not educate children who have come into our state for no other reason than they've been brought there by no fault of their own, I don't think you have a heart.
Whoa. Not only had Perry come across as tongue-tied, he just accused the majority of Republicans of being heartless. Conservative commentator Bill Kristol wrote, "No frontrunner has ever, we imagine, had as weak a showing as Rick Perry. It was close to a disqualifying 2 hours for him." But what nobody outside of Perry's inner circle knew at the time was that the governor had a big problem. That July, just weeks before jumping into the race, Perry had major back surgery, including experimental stem cell therapy. He'd been told he'd be pain-free in a fortnight. Instead, it took months to recover. Perry took himself off painkillers as the campaign began, but now a shooting pain through his feet and up his legs turned him into an insomniac, and a lack of exercise triggered chronic sleep apnea. His staff could see the longer Perry had to stand on that debate stage, the more pain he suffered and the more fatigue he felt. On the morning of that Orlando debate, Perry told staff he literally hadn't slept a wink. Then came this now notorious moment in the 9th debate of the campaign, Perry's 6th, on November 9 in Auburn Hills, Michigan.
It's 3 agencies of government when I get there that are gone: commerce, education, and the, what's the third one there? Let's see.
EPA?
EPA, there you go. No, okay.
Let's talk deposition.
Seriously? Is EPA the one you were talking about? Or
No, sir.
You can't name the third one?
The third agency of government,
Yeah.
I would do away with the education, the commerce, and let's see. I can't. The third one I can't. Sorry. Oops.
It was excruciating and even more disqualifying than his performance in Orlando. But the polls tell an important story. When Perry appeared in the first debate on September 7th, he was on 29%, leading Romney by 11. Heading into that Orlando debate, he was on 28%, still almost 8 points in front of Romney. But in the 2 weeks after that heartless gaffe, he crashed to just 12%, 13 points behind Romney. And on the day of the Michigan oops moment, Perry had already fallen to 10%. After that, he slipped below 8 points by December. Perry's sleeping had improved, and so had his debate performances, but his polls kept falling. He was a laughing stock. He came fifth in the Iowa caucuses with just 10%. He skipped New Hampshire and dropped out before South Carolina on January 19th, 2012, endorsing Newt Gingrich over Mitt Romney. But contrary to popular belief, it wasn't the oops moment that did all the damage. The rot set in Orlando. In June 2015, Rick Perry, with a new pair of glasses, announced he was running for president a second time, but he struggled to raise money or much support and ended his campaign in barely 3 months. When Donald Trump won the White House, he appointed Rick Perry as his energy secretary. Ironically, that was the third government department Perry planned to abolish in 2011, but couldn't remember its name. Like so many before him, news of National Security Advisor and friend of the show John Bolton's departure from the Trump administration came in a presidential tweet.
I informed John Bolton last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House.
And the president continued,
I disagreed strongly with many of his suggestions.
Turns out one of the things they disagreed on was whether Bolton was sacked or whether he quit.
I asked John for his resignation.
So you say, but John Bolton has a Twitter account of his own. 12 minutes after the president broke that news, Bolton gave his version of events, saying, I offered to resign last night, and President Trump said, let's talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah, and then Bolton texted journalist Robert Costa about it. And then he texted Fox News' Brian Kilmeade about it while Kilmeade was live on air. And then the next day an article appeared in Bloomberg in which Trump basically wanted to fold to Iran, but John Bolton argued forcefully against such a step. Almost heroically, John, with the wind blowing through his hair.
Moustache.
I think someone might have a score to settle, John.
You could be right. But of course, the more serious disagreements were between President Trump and Ambassador Bolton on matters of policy. Bolton, for instance, wanted a military strike against Iran back in June after Iran was accused of downing a US drone. The president called that off in the final minutes. Bolton didn't want the president to hold any more talks with North Korea and was a lot more wary of Russia, pushing successfully to scrap the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty.
Yeah, their differences have been apparent for a while. As you say, back when Trump was having his historic meeting with Kim Jong-un in the DMZ, he sent John Bolton off to Mongolia. And when...
Almost literally being sent to Siberia.
Yes. And when this deal with the Taliban was being mooted, Bolton asked for a copy of the agreement and they wouldn't give it to him. They told him he could only read it in the presence of a senior official and couldn't take it with him. Ouch.
Apparently they thought he was a leaker. Well, the straw that broke the camel's back does seem to be the issue of Afghanistan. The president wanted to meet with leaders of the Taliban last weekend, the weekend before the anniversary of 9/11, to finalise a peace deal and a timetable for the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. Bolton opposed this meeting, and ultimately he did get his way when Trump called the summit off, declaring the talks to be dead. But it was kind of a Pyrrhic victory, it seems, Chaz.
Yes, yeah. Well, Trump said that he ended the negotiations because in order to build false leverage, the Taliban admitted to an attack in Kabul that killed an American soldier. So that is why he cancelled the meeting. I'm not sure I buy that though, given that 16 Americans had been killed during the period of negotiations, including one after Trump was briefed on the peace agreement and supported finalising it. It also seems unlikely given Pompeo was running around saying this.
You should know, in the last 10 days we've killed over 1,000 Taliban.
In fact, it seems much more likely to me that Trump called the negotiations off because the Afghan president postponed his trip to Washington and the Taliban refused to travel to America before a deal was signed. To see what's going on here, I think we need to look at what the deal actually involved. America was promising to withdraw their troops, with the first 5,000 leaving within 135 days, in return for the Taliban guaranteeing not to support any global terror attacks being launched from Afghanistan. But importantly, it was not a ceasefire. The Taliban only agreed to a reduction in violence in Kabul and where America had a military base. So Taliban could still attack Afghans and their army under the deal. You can see why the Afghan president wouldn't have been thrilled with those terms. And even those small concessions from the Taliban might have been a stretch. As recently as a few months ago, the UN described the Taliban as the primary partner of Al-Qaeda and said that Afghanistan was a continuing safe haven for Al-Qaeda's leadership. So, deal or no deal, Afghanistan has problems, especially given that America's been fighting there longer than the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, and the Korean War combined. And yet in 2018, civilian deaths in Afghanistan hit a record high. And in the first half of 2019, the Afghan government and its allies were responsible for more of those civilian deaths than the Taliban were. Now, America has got to somehow extract itself from this war without even a nominee for Homeland Security Secretary or for Director of National Intelligence, and now National Security Advisor as well. It's pretty dire, John.
Certainly is. The US Supreme Court has handed a big win to the Trump administration, at least for now, allowing a ban on migrants who've travelled through third countries, such as Mexico, from seeking asylum in the United States. According to the Wall Street Journal, the court order allows the administration to enforce its asylum restrictions while legal challenges to the policy continue. That is a process that could last many more months, Chad.
Yeah, this could effectively disqualify the vast majority of asylum seekers, even if they have legitimate claims. But it's been a big week for the administration on illegal immigration. Look at the latest figures for southern border interceptions. Since May, the numbers have fallen by about 56%. Now, those numbers are still relatively high compared to recent years. We're talking about 60,000 interceptions. And obviously, those numbers fall during every American summer, so there is a seasonal element there. But nevertheless, arrests have risen from July to August in 8 of the last 10 years, and now they're going down. So there's something else going on here. The administration says it's the Remain in Mexico program working. That keeps asylum seekers in Mexico while they're waiting for their court case. They also think Mexico mobilising 25,000 National Guard troops on their borders has helped. I don't know, but something is working. And Trump finally appears to be making an impact on illegal immigration, even without his war.
Go figure.
Yeah. Now, last week I said this. Economists are expecting about 150,000 new jobs and a steady unemployment rate. So there is your bar. If the figures are in that ballpark, it's all good. But if there's less than 100,000 new jobs, say, the market might start to tighten up that little bit more. Well, the results are in, so let's dig in.
Big, beautiful world.
Okay, so here are our projections, and the magic numbers are 130,000 jobs created and 3.7% unemployment. Not bad. Although if you look at that on the graph, it's not fantastic either, especially given that 28,000 of those jobs are just temporary workers being hired for the census. You can see it's quite unusual for the federal government to hire that many workers. But even with those temporary census workers there, job creation is clearly starting to slow down. In fact, the 3-month and 6-month job creation averages are both now at around 150,000 jobs, whereas they were about 230,000 a year ago. Also, you can see that there has been a little bit of a rise in people who are part-time workers who actually want a full-time job. That bump there equals 397,000 workers. But there are plenty of positives as well, like for instance, a record low in black women's unemployment. Yay! Also, real wages for blue-collar workers over the last 12 months did tick up a little bit in August, and that's great. Although, something interesting about wages, the jobs that are growing the fastest often have very low wages. Look at this. 6 of the top 10 growing jobs all pay below $27,000 a year. That may be part of the reason why some people might not be noticing these real wage increases. But one more piece of good news, maybe those real wage increases aren't such a coincidence. Remember this? Maybe if the prime age employment to population ratio was to raise by, say, another point or two, then wage growth might be pretty good. Dave, did we have to pause the video at that exact moment? Well, look, the prime age employment to population ratio did rise from 79.5% to 80%. So no wonder wages went up. But wait, there's more. You can see once again, right after a peak, there is almost always a recession. And if we zoom into the last few years of that graph, you will notice America has just experienced another peak. I did notice that, but oh, come on, really, Dave? Look, if we update that graph to this month, you'll see that for a start, we've reached the highest levels in 12 years. And also you'll notice that that wasn't a proper peak after all. The prime age employment to population ratio is still growing, which means the much talked about recession may be further away than people feared. Yay! Overall, it's a mixed employment report. You could react a number of ways, but 14 more of these kinds of reports and Trump would be more than happy.
Big, beautiful world.
Time now for an all-new segment. We're calling it It's All Trump's Fault.
Did I do that?
Yeah, well, look, we noticed that Trump gets blamed for an awful lot of things. The more extreme, the better.
Trump is as destructive a person in this century as Hitler, Stalin, and Mao were in the last century. He may be responsible for many more million deaths than they were.
See, that guy's got the flavour.
I understand.
So we're going to assess just how much Trump is to blame for all this stuff.
Okay, first up, this story about military personnel being sent to a Trump resort in Scotland during refuelling stops, all at taxpayers' expense. Congressional Democrats launched an investigation after the UK's Guardian newspaper first reported in June that Scotland's Prestwick Airport was being used by the US military and they had struck a deal with Donald Trump's golf resort at Turnberry. Politico went further last weekend, raising questions about the arrangement to send troops to Trump Turnberry, claiming the incidents raised the possibility that the military has helped keep Trump's Turnberry resort financially afloat. And of course, Chaz, that fed into this broader narrative of Trump profiting from the presidency through his hotels, including decisions by the likes of Mike Pence to stay at Trump properties on the taxpayers' dime on the opposite side of an island that he needed to be on.
Look, it did feed into that, except what was actually going on was the airport had a pre-existing deal with the Air Force to arrange hotel accommodations for arriving crews, and Trump had made a deal separately with the airport back in 2014 to get a slice of that action for his hotel. So this was happening through the airport long before Trump was president. And the partnership has grown from 95 stops in 2015 to 145 stops in 2016, and then when Trump was president, kept on increasing to 259 and counting stops this year. So is that recent increase because of Trump's corruption? Maybe. Or maybe it's like the military says, because of operational demands, such as the location being convenient, the airport being 24-hour, and there being ample parking. Or maybe it's because the Trump hotel costs less than the Marriott and well below the per diem rate. I know this is all a bit murky, but I'm not really feeling this one.
Yeah, to me it kind of is pretty murky because it underscores why presidents shouldn't still be in business and then receiving taxpayer dollars. It looks crooked even if there's a reasonable excuse. What are we going to give this on the Trump-o-meter? Is this Trump's fault?
I'd say it's a little overhyped, so let's call it a 5.
Okay, deal. Now to a story that was trumpeted by CNN as an exclusive. The CIA had a mole in the Russian government who they suddenly extracted in 2017 because they didn't trust Trump not to blow his cover.
The removal of the Russian was driven in part by concerns that President Trump and his administration repeatedly mishandled classified intelligence and could contribute to exposing the covert source as a spy. The decision to carry out the extraction occurred soon after a May 2017 meeting in the Oval Office in which Trump discussed highly classified intelligence with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and then Russian Ambassador to the U.S. Sergei Kislyak.
Yes, but the New York Times had some fairly pertinent details. This source first came to people's attention in 2016 when Obama intelligence officials revealed how Russia had been interfering with the election, and they supplied a little too much detail. The news media picked up on those details and started asking questions, so if the news media smelt a rat, then Russia certainly would have. So the CIA then tried to extract the source from Russia, but he refused. In 2017, the news media made more inquiries, and then the source allowed them to extract him. So this wasn't a Trump thing, this was an Obama thing, or at least his intelligence people. Oh, and a media thing as well, because even now, NBC is still declaring where the guy lives and knocking on his door for some reason I don't understand. Hey, guess what happens? They're approached by people who are probably government agents. Nice scoop, Ace.
Yeah, all I heard was Trump Russia. I'm giving it a 10. No, seriously though, is this Trump's fault?
I'm giving it a 1.
All right, I say there's a little bit more to it because Trump was a part of the reason for the timing of the particular extraction. That was at a time where a whole lot of people with no particular grudge against Trump were saying, what's going on with him and the Russians right now? So maybe a 2? Call it 2?
Yeah, okay, deal.
All right then, let's call it that.
You got anything else?
Yeah, we reported last week on that whole doctored weather map that Trump showed, which put Alabama in the path of Hurricane Dorian. Weather officials in Alabama had already contradicted the president's warning that the storm could impact the state. Well, this week it was reported that the White House and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross pressured the weather folks at the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration to publicly back Trump over their own forecasters, which they did. But then the NOAA administrator, Neil Jacobs, quickly moved to defend the team that he just said were wrong.
No one's job is under threat, not mine, not yours. The Weather Service team has my full support and the support of the department.
But then the Post reported what we kind of suspected last week, which was that the doctorer behind Sharpie-gate was none other than the Doctor-in-Chief, President Donald J. Trump. A White House official quoted as saying, "No one else writes like that on a map with a black Sharpie," which means, of course, that either the Post's White House source is lying or this guy's lying.
And that map that you showed today looks like it's almost like a Sharpie.
I don't know.
Ooh, I don't know. The good news is Alabama was fine. Not so much of a gust of wind, but while the Bahamas did take a very heavy hit, the southeast of the United States really dodged a bullet in all this.
Yeah, look, there are a lot of White House sources in this story, and by the way, some of them are tying Trump directly to the order for the weather guys to reverse their statement. So I'm not going to even offer a defence. This whole thing was a dumpster fire.
Okay, so what are we going to give it on the Trumper-meter?
Look, I would give it a 7, except I resent Trump so much for subjecting us to 2 weeks of that garbage.
Yes.
Let's make it a 10.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, that is it for another bumper week on Planet America.
No extra, you got to debate. Watch on YouTube again.
See you Friday. Bye.